So this is an episode of PodCask. We have many different kind of like little networks on the YouTube channel. So Nathan and I did a podcast or a YouTube video where we went up to Chaz or Chop, and got a lot of hate for that. I don't really comment on the comments, but I wanted to bring in I'm always have an open mind, and I want to get a bunch of different perspectives on things. And not that one is pro or con or for or against what was happening up there, but I happen to have some friends that are, I guess you would experts on the subject. If there was an expert, if you can call someone an expert, it would be these guys here to my right and to my left. So I kind of want to get their perspective on things. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Kyle?
Yeah, I'm Kyle McCutcheon. I got a lot of experience in training in law enforcement. And been with a law enforcement agency for almost 18 years. And I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I can, provide a lot of perspective in a lot of these different topics. Also a lifelong martial artist. I run a jiu-jitsu academy in my free time. And it's really all it comes down to is I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but, I'm pretty knowledgeable and I can offer some perspective that maybe some people don't really know about.
Fair enough. And to my right, we have Drake. Drake, you want to?
Gary Drake. I was also a law enforcement officer for about 24 years. I'm currently an executive protection agent with an international company. In my law enforcement career, I spent probably about 6 years of that in teaching at the academy and teaching instructor level courses for combatives, for defensive tactics and firearms in that.
So I guess the first thing is I'm by no means a professional interviewer, so I'm just gonna kind of go with my whim here. I do have the power of editing, so that's a plus. Let's start with a really simple question. I don't really like the interview format, but I figure we got to start somewhere. So let's start with you, Kyle, and then we'll move back over here. Do you see, I guess, areas of opportunity to be the way to put it when it comes to the problems and then solutions with what we can do to better our law enforcement in this country?
I think the first thing that always comes to mind that I like to talk about, I don't think the general public really has a grasp on, is just the fact that generally speaking, law enforcement in this country is not highly trained. We need to come to that understanding. They get very limited skill-based training. Most departments in the country, in my experience, have very limited skill-based use of force training. It's usually kind of pared down to an annual taser recertification, which could vary as far as what that means. The minimum qualification for that is firing a couple of cartridges into a target and running through some, static drills, and then maybe a couple of firearms qualifications a year. So understanding that when they're faced with, a higher frequency of encountering people that don't necessarily make it to a level where even a taser would be appropriate, and it starts out something maybe low level where they just need to control somebody with going, hands-on, and most cops just aren't well equipped for that. It's a lot of times it's just a free-for-all, and without really any skill, things can kind of go south. And I think the general public doesn't know that. I think the general public assumes law enforcement are these highly trained individuals that can handle somebody no problem. And you couple that with the fact that it's actually really hard to control somebody that doesn't want to be controlled. I think people underestimate how difficult that really is.
Especially without creating serious injury. Right?
Exactly. So I kind of use this analogy. I compare it to, let's say you're a wrestler and you compete in wrestling, right? So in a wrestling match, you go out and you're competing against an opponent who is also engaging in a wrestling match. Well, your average person that doesn't want to go with being arrested, they don't have to engage, right? I mean, in wrestling, there's penalties for, running around the ring and stalling.
Red card.
That's literally what you're dealing
Yellow
with
card.
when you're trying to take custody of somebody, right? Is somebody that doesn't have to engage you and doesn't have to play by any set of rules. Where in law enforcement, there are rules that we have to play by. We have to do our best to not injure this person. We have to stay within the confines of our policies and what's appropriate when we're using force. And really, it's decided upon that person that we're trying to arrest where this goes. We can do our best to try and de-escalate and everything else, but ultimately, if this person does not want to do that, they're the ones deciding it. I think the public doesn't understand that. It's a difficult task. And then what I always say, I'm going to throw it out there, is like, it is expected of us to seize people and take custodial arrests of people. And I think that until the day that we, the people, decide, hey, you know what, cops, we don't want you arresting people, we're always going to have issues. The best way, I think, to handle that is to get as best trained cops you can. Like I said, you're in a higher frequency when you're getting into these things where somebody is just doing like a resisting arrest type situation that can escalate to anything. You know, we've seen that in recent incidents. So, you know, you're talking about reform and everything. I am all for reform. I've been an activist within law enforcement really for the frontline uniform officer, and just knowing this and always having been a pretty trained individual. I've always taken pride in making sure that I stay trained and recognizing that there is this giant gap that needs addressing that just never seems to get paid to mind, because I think the general public doesn't understand it. And then what we need to know also is when budget gets into crisis, the first thing to go is training. Every time. It's very expensive to train a department, you know. And I think if we had anywhere that we can make immediate change is to start training our cops better to handle these situations so that they're better equipped, you know.
I'm sorry.
And we both know that the officers that are the most high skilled officers very seldom have to use force.
Exactly.
Because there's two things to it. One, their confidence levels is very high. And two, that when they go control right away. They control things quickly, efficiently, right? Maximizing control, minimizing injury to those suspects. So the more higher trained people are, the less they have to go to the taser right away. The less they have to do, if the taser doesn't work, the more tools that they have, right? So the most skilled guys and and gals and out there are the guys that have to use force less for a lot of different reasons. But when they have to use force, there's not a lot of injuries from those people too, because they know how to use force. They know how to control people. They know when to control people. They know when that line goes from de-escalation to, you know what, no matter what we tell this person, they're not going to de-escalate. We have to control this situation quickly.
It's the ultimate de-escalation, knowing you have a giant skill set to fall back on. You're going to stay calmer for much longer. You're not going to get over your head. You know, there's a lot of criticism. We hear it almost becomes cliche that, the police officer's in fear for their life in this situation. And a lot of these are tragedies, but it's like you look at it, and somebody like Gary or I, we watch these incidents unfold, and we look at it, we go, that cop doesn't know what he's doing. He's in over his head. He probably, or he or she, whoever it may be, they probably really are in fear for their life because they're in a position that they're not equipped to handle, and it's going wrong. I say this a lot, that a lot of the times, so basically you can split things into two different things. We have control tactics, then we have defensive tactics, right? We have attempting to control somebody and skills we use to that, and then we have skills that we use when police officers have to protect themselves.
So
I can't think of most situations start out with attempting to make a custodial arrest, which would be control tactics. But the lack of control tactics often leads to us having to defend ourselves, officer survival situation, which would fall under the defensive tactics, right? And if we really truly understood the first one better, a lot of these things could be taken care of before they go off the rails. And I think that comes with, a highly trained police officer.
So with me personally, I was a guy, if you were to ask me 10 years ago how I felt about police, it was a completely different perspective than nowadays, primarily through martial arts. And like I said, some of my very best friends are police officers. One of the big gripes I had, and not trying to stir anything here, but one of the big gripes I had was that it seemed like there was a lack of acknowledgement for a variety of reasons of officers to admit there was a problem. I think that whole thin blue line thing really rubs people the wrong way. You hear that all the time. Like, if there's really good cops out there, why aren't they acknowledging these things? And I think that that's happening more nowadays than ever. How do you guys feel about that?
I disagree with that. I've been a cop since.
That's fair. I need your perspective.
Since the early '90s, and everybody knew that we needed more training. Everybody knew that a lot of the situations we were put into, if you didn't have prior training or you didn't go out and get your own training, Kyle and I are friends. We've been friends for a long time. Through martial arts is how we met each other. And you always saw that there were those officers and deputies that went out and did their own training to better themselves, because we knew that the training that we were getting was not appropriate time. One of the groups I trained with, called A Wrestling, it started from that. It started from guys that were just martial artists, guys that train in the mornings together. If Kyle was a judo guy, we'd come out and we'd do judo for a week. If I was a kickboxer, we do kickboxing for a week. If you were a yoga master, which, yeah, obviously you're
That's
not.
me.
But we do that. And what happened was after a tragic event where one of our partners were killed, and we realized that he was killed doing the shit that we were teaching at the time, and it wasn't appropriate, right? So this has been going on for a long time. It's I don't think, as an officer that had been around for quite a while, it's been one of the biggest problems that we've had, is that we're just not enough time. Like Kyle already hit on, when budgets get cut, the first thing they do is cut training. Guess what? The first part they cut of training is usually your defensive tactics or your combatives, right? Next part now is firearms. Now you go from firearms training to just qualifications, and that's not appropriate enough neither.
I agree.
When people don't have those skill sets and they don't have the confidence to deal with those situations, that's where we see, rash decisions being made. Like Kyle said, most of these people, you know what? I've been an investigator. I've investigated, in the line of shootings, stuff like that. A lot of different complaints. And a lot of times when you're talking to those officers, guess what? They are scared at that time. If I grab a hold of Big Bobby here, right, and I don't know what I'm doing, and he pulls away from me and starts punching me in the face, and I don't know anything else to do, guess what? I am in fear of my life. I'm carrying, one of the things we've always said with officers and deputies, we always carry a gun to the fight. If I get knocked out, if my partner gets knocked out, now this person can get to a gun, which is now a lethal weapon, and we see that a lot, right? We see that, and it's never the thin blue line thing. As far as like in the training realm, there's always been, as long as I've been a cop, there's always been, hey, we need more training. Guys that work for trainers, firearms guys or DT guys, we've always said we need more of this, and this. We submit a training cycle every year. They go, okay, well, this looks great, but let's cut off this, or let's cut off this, right? How much stuff the public asks us to do versus how much time we actually get to train, like Kyle said. You know what? People watch these movies and they watch Die Hard and all this stuff, and they think these cops are able to do this. They watch these cops doing rolls over tables. None of that works. They watch these fight scenes that last 5 or 6 minutes, right? That and the public kind of thinks that's how cops are trained, and they're really not. The lack of training, the amount of hours that they get per year is just inadequate. And if cops don't go out to their own training, which a lot do because of that.
We're good. Sorry, the battery over there died. He had to replace it, but you guys are good.
So the other side of this thing is that because we're not doing a lot of training, we don't do a lot of reality-based training. We don't put cops in these scenarios to where, they're having to use empty hand skills. You have cops that overestimate their capabilities. I can't think of how many times I was, if it went down, I'd be able to handle myself. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's just not true. I mean, there's a thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it's a study on humans in general greatly overestimate their capabilities. Well, cops are subject to that. Okay,
big fishes, big time.
And what ends up happening in the police world, right, is that they think, okay, I'm going to be able to handle myself if things go down. Luckily, it's actually pretty rare when you get into like a real dangerous knockdown drag out type of fight like by yourself. It's pretty rare. And so there's many cops that just they go through their whole career and that never happens. And you're pretty lucky if you go through a whole entire career to retirement and not ever like had a situation where your life is on the line, right? I mean that itself is pretty rare. But the incidents themselves are pretty low frequency, right? So what ends up happening, because you're not getting the training, you're not getting exposed, you're not getting these little inoculations to these type of situations, so you still are subject to the Dunning-Kruger effect. You think you're going to be able to handle yourself in this situation. And with no exposure, heaven forbid one of these things happens and your performance is subpar. maybe you're greatly injured, or just had to use your firearm in a situation that was maybe not that it's not justified, but maybe avoidable if somebody else that had skills could handle the situation. But now your performance was so poor that it's hard to get back to an operational level. Your confidence has gone down so far you can't even get back to where you're operational. Many of these cops quit because of these incidents. I can think of several off the top of my head where they were put in a situation where they almost died and they just can't do the job anymore. Whereas when you expose yourself to training, you put yourself in reality-based situations, you get yourself into these situations. Even though there will be a dip, and your performance is never going to be what you think it's going to be in a real life encounter, right? But because you've inoculated yourself to this, you're able to bounce back to an operational level, and you don't have this just complete shutdown and scared to go on the job again.
I mean, this happens with just regular folk too. I mean, how many times have we seen someone come into the jiu-jitsu academy that thinks they can handle themselves, and then you pair them up with a blue belt that's been training for a year, and they get rolled up and never come back.
Yeah,
and that's common with I think that's something amongst the average population experiences as well.
That's what I said. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a study of humans. It's not a study of cops.
Sure.
It's
But
humans in general grossly overestimate their capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's across all planes.
And unfortunately, in law enforcement, even a few years ago, with our reality-based training, we were told, hey, you got to create something that the officers are going to win at.
Yeah.
Because if they don't, they're going to come out of here with that sense of failure, right? Where I think all three of us could say that, as far as training, as far as competition, I've learned the most from when I failed, right? And we weren't allowed to push.
Just today.
Or we were told not to push, to these people to that failure point.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So like what Kyle said, with that effect, we almost created that in a way, going, oh no, you did a good job, you did this, you did that, and in the sideline we'd look at each other and go, holy shit.
So something on a much lesser level than what you guys are talking about, even working at the security when I did, the knowing that I can use my radio and someone would be there relatively quickly made a huge difference in my confidence level of whether or not I was going to get into an altercation with somebody. I mean, the scariest time I ever had was I was in a parking lot a good 60 yards away, and stuff started going down, and I called on the radio, and I knew I had a good probably 30, 45 seconds before anyone was going to get there, and I was like, uh-oh. Like, what am I going to do at this point? So, I mean, I couldn't imagine being on a traffic stop and having that sinking feeling set, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, it's going to be a while before anybody gets here.
Like a lot of the young officers I train is just like, that's fine, call for backup, but your ass is on your own.
Yeah.
You just have to assume that, because you just don't know when they're going to get there.
A lot of places where Kyle and I work, man, we didn't have backup for
Oh,
4, 5,
there's places on some
10,
departments.
15 minutes,
there's some places on the department that's a 40-minute code run.
Yeah.
To get to you.
Yeah.
So what do you think about? So say I'll get to you, Gary, here in a moment. So, Kyle, if there were immediate things you could put in place, what would they be in order to effect like significant change that you think would improve things?
If the problem is like I said earlier, it costs a lot of money to train a department, especially a sizable department. You're asking for a lot of money. And so there it comes down to, like, I don't really know what the answer is, because in order to sufficiently train people, right? Well, number one, I think the culture has to change. I think, generally speaking, most departments don't have a culture of training. And so now you get these veteran cops that have been away from the academy for years, and they're used to just kind of going and working whatever their regular job is, whether it's patrol or whatever detective unit they're in or anything like that. And that interrupts their routine if you unplug them and you try and put them in some training, and a lot of times they're resistant to that, because it's interrupting whatever they have going on in their normal work life, right? And so we don't have it in our culture because it's not consistent usually in most departments. Things change all the time. Some of the training, I would even say, I would say that some of the content that was trained is just not good, especially traditionally. I think there was a time in law enforcement where we were doing bad training. So, I can see why they may be resistant to it. But we've kind of developed this culture where, we don't train, so therefore they don't want to train. And now it's going to require a whole paradigm shift just to get things on track. And you know, for me personally, I'm trying to start with this next generation because, you know, there's just so much accountability right now in law enforcement. There's a lot going on, and realistically, you almost have to take the ownership upon yourself. You know, I know Gary and I were of that, you know, and which is, we knew each other early on because there was just such a small group of you know, law enforcement types that recognize this, and we're all training with each other basically. You know, it didn't matter what department. We all knew the other guys like us on the other departments. And I think there has to be, you know, I tell these youngsters, it's like, look I don't know that the department's going to train you. In fact, my guess is you're probably not going to be sufficiently trained. At least that's what history has suggested. So it's almost like part of being a professional now. If you're going to be in law enforcement, you need to seek training on your own. And, you know, and that's for survival. If you're entering into this career, I think you owe it to yourself to go out there on your own and do it. Now, there's some people that are going to stand there and say, well, if the department really wants me to be this trained individual, they'll make it happen for me. And I can't argue with that. All they can do is give you examples of what that looks like. And there's plenty out there to be had.
You know, that's one of the things that people like. We created a really good thing with the gym that we ran up north, or you were currently running, and that I was a part of up north. Is that, you know, we allowed law enforcement to come in and train pretty much free of charge, and I think that goes a long way because we had a relatively good response. There was a time where I remember being in class and every single person in class, I specifically remember the day, it was like, oh, these are all law enforcement officers or people that work in corrections and a wide variety of folks. Is there anything you want to add? Like, what would you, if Drake could sit here and be like, okay, these are the changes I would institute across the board for folks. Is there something what would you do?
Well, I 100% agree with Kyle on everything he said, but there's one other aspect to it, is basic fitness levels.
Yeah.
We don't have, everybody thinks cops should be, you know, these fit, and we should be. We should be. You know, that one of the things that with our training group and what we said is the day you put on the badge is you know, the day you cannot be unfit.
Yep.
And we see that in some of these instances too. It's not just that they're not being trained. It's like, man, if they're in a fight with somebody for 20 seconds and all of a sudden they start gassing, right? It's just like, you know, what starts happening, right? They don't make rational decisions, right? They can't make rational decisions. They go into that, you know, fight or flight or, you know, mode, right? And now they're in that basically that fight mode. They're not in control of themselves. So, you know, one of the things besides the training and the culture of training, which Kyle's 110% right on, is that we have to start looking at some of these fitness levels too. Firefighters have fitness tests.
That's the two things I preach to these youngsters is, hey, you need to maintain fitness and you need to maintain your skills. Yep. And that's anymore. If you're entering this career, you better consider that as part of being a professional.
Yeah. And one of the shootings I investigated, you know, the officer, she said that she was fighting this guy, and all of a sudden she couldn't catch her breath, had no strength left, had no grip in her hand left, and that's when she went to the gun. I
mean, we feel it all the time when we get tired training. When you're rolling for 10 minutes straight, well, he might not feel it, but I felt it. Even today, I was like, oh, I got nothing left.
You know, so you know, not only the culture of training, but the culture of fitness. With these guys should be better fit. We should be better fit than the firefighters out there. You know.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, you know, the like Kyle said earlier, with the culture of training, there's certain groups of people in there that go, hey, I recognize I need to do this, and this, right? I need to do a little bit more CrossFit, so I need to get in there. But even that fitness levels, we know at higher fitness levels, right? The chance of them being injured is a lot lower. If they are injured, the chance of them still being able to fight through is a lot higher, and they make better decision making on that when they can think rationally through that. So the culture of training has to include that in that too. And you know, with the culture of training, like Kyle said, is that, you know, we have people that, you know, like Kyle and I and a whole bunch of us, man, we had a training day. We were like, oh shit, man, I don't have to be in that car all day. Yeah. I don't have to push my patrol vehicle around. I don't have to answer calls. All I got to do is roll the mat. All I got to do is get to the range. All I got to do is hit these scenarios, right? But believe it or not, that's not the mentality of a lot of them, and it is because of that culture. Is that you have a guy that's been on the department 20 years. He's like, I don't need to do this shit, right? right, why do I need to do this shit? And because we haven't pushed that kind of thing.
If it just became part of the job, right? If we had consistent training, right, and then it just becomes the expectations, like however the frequency is, right? And for most departments, it's not consistent, and that's part of the issue, right? And if you don't do any training for a long time and then you do it, then they're kind of like, well, yeah, but when's the next time we're going to do this again? And then, it takes the value out of what they're learning then. And they're not wrong, when they can make that criticism. It's like, yeah, I can't tell you, because again, you got budgets that get in the way. We got, different cycles of the economy that will dictate budgets. I mean, we've had to do layoffs before. And then of course you're not training when that's going on, because ultimately you still have to cover your jurisdiction, and that's really what it comes down to is some of it is not completely the department's fault. Like I said, I don't know where the money's going to come from sometime. So,
and technique wise too, I mean, we've gotten to a point where agencies and academies have wanted something where it was definitively, we can say that they did this technique because they had this position, and we should be teaching more of concepts and principles. Mm-hmm. Yep. Concepts and principles of, not technique. If I'm rolling with you and all I got is that straight arm bar, that straight arm bar, and then I can't get that, right? We've got nothing else, right?
Conceptual learning is
so how do I move you, or how do I manipulate you to put you in a position to where I can do that straight arm bar? So understanding more concepts and principles, which takes more time and training. Obviously, but again, we got to get away from that technique-based training. Going, this is the test. You have to have your arm in this perfect position. You have to do this.
And traditionally,
that's not how fights work.
Traditionally, what it's been is it looks good on paper, right? So everybody kind of buys off. It's like, oh, this looks good on paper. It looks defensible. It's a nice, clean system. But the realistic application isn't there. It's not being used in the street. And if it was, you would see evidence of that. I mean, there's enough stuff on YouTube now. You would see it, and it's just not out there.
So there was another question I wanted to ask you guys about. The Atlanta, in the midst of everything that's happened recently, they had the blue fever.
Okay.
What are your general thoughts on, you know what I'm talking about, obviously?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? I mean, whoever wants to start, jump in.
I mean, I'm not in Atlanta. I don't like trying to, speak on any other. That's not my experience. I've just from my limited knowledge on that. I mean, I think they're getting a raw deal down there. I think there's some shady stuff going on. When 11 charges against those officers come out without even the investigation being complete, I think that's unprecedented. So it makes me think that things are very hostile down there right now as far as
there might be some politics at play, essentially.
And it's hard for me to really judge from afar all the way across the country. I don't like to
of course,
look at anything like that I have no real perspective on.
Yeah. I mean, and unfortunately for me, I've been operational wise, we haven't been able to be really up to date on that. But I do know, man, it's kind of hard to do this job sometimes when not only is your command not backing you up, your city council's not backing you up. Some people in your community aren't backing you up, and when all three hit, man, it's kind of hard to really go out there and work.
Feel like you're alone.
Yeah, you work for an unappreciated, or you feel like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Yeah. If you have support from one of the, one of the areas, man. I mean, if it's really great when you have support of your public. I mean, even over your command or over the council, when your public tells you, man, you guys are doing a great job. We really appreciate you out here. That's what most cops are there for. We're not there to impress our command. We're not there to impress the council, man. We're there. Most cops I know are there to protect the public, to be part of that community. And that's really where they get their kudos from is from the community, not your command. I mean, your command and your city councils and your commissioners or whatever. I mean, those people. That's who you shouldn't be out there to impress. You should be out there to impress the command and the community that you work for.
And I think
you lose that, it makes it hard.
we're in a unique situation where everything just kind of exploded under a perfect storm, you know, coming out of a lockdown and then having the Minneapolis incident hit, and then everything's, you know, blowing up, and for a reason, you know, but this is what I'll say about that. Like, it's got to be pretty bad for, if that's truly what happened, and I don't know because I'm not there and I don't have all the specifics and I don't like to speculate, but, you know, it certainly appears that cops were not going to work intentionally. And I would say that is, you know, in my time in law enforcement, I've never, you know, experienced that.
Unprecedented.
And so it's kind of like, we all took an oath. We all kind of understand we need to be there, and that's our job, and no matter what's going on. So that either can tell you, you know, I think that just tells you how bad it's gotten down there for that to be occurring, if that's what's happening. So, you know, morale has to be the absolute lowest. And I think overall, in general, in law enforcement and country, the morale is way down right now. I mean, like Drake was speaking to, is like, we're kind of getting hit from all sides at the moment, and that's tough to take, you know. And it's not, you know, when Ferguson happened, it was similar, but again, we didn't have the perfect storm when Ferguson happened. Like right now, you just had all these people in lockdown. Everybody's already stressed out and high strung, and then something like this happens. And what the unfortunate thing is, I think most people look at the Minneapolis incident and we go, yeah, that was messed up, man, you know? And so it's like something that we all kind of agree on, but somehow we're so divided still. And I don't know how that happened, you know? And it's just a tough spot to be in right now. I think morale in general, maybe overall in this country, maybe we're not even talking about law enforcement. Maybe just in general in this country, everybody's morale is down.
So I'm not. Were you going to say something?
No.
So I'm by no means a law enforcement officer. I've come, like I said, my friends have changed my mind significantly over the past 10. Well, how long have we been friends for? 6-7 years, something like that. Yeah. So people like Kyle have significantly changed my mind, and he may not even realized he had done that. But I mean, if you just go look at my Facebook when Occupy was going on, right? So to kind of take, not even play devil's advocate, but my perspective on things, I always say that there's a need for significant and monumental change, not only in this country, also in law enforcement. And the biggest thing for me, and I don't even fault law enforcement for this, it's in my opinion, it's even policy. The fact that your door can get broken down at 1 a.m. and that you can be fired upon, and you can go to jail for life for returning fire for the wrong address on a no-knock raid, proves that there's something wrong in this country that needs some change. Proves that I mean, I couldn't imagine being in that situation. And that does happen. And it's not all the time, it's the exception. But the fact that can happen, like, just proves that, like, what are we doing? Like, there needs, and I think that when you talk about everything a perfect storm, that kind of frustration is what built up. Like, people have been calling for change for these things. People have been saying, hey, like, there's something wrong here. We need to address this. And that they feel like they're not getting heard. And that's not to say that their output of anger is directed in the right direction, because I don't believe it is. But that's to say that I think they're justified in their complaint. That's my perspective. I'm not a law enforcement officer. I don't know how you guys would feel about that, but that has happened before in the past, and I think that's.
Well, if we look at the medical community,
yeah.
Absolutely.
How many malpractice suits are there a year? How many deaths are in a year
100%.
there, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, this kind of stuff's going to happen, and unfortunately, it does. You know, when one of the biggest fights I've ever been in law enforcement was because somebody's music was on too loud, the next door neighbors. Guess what? That person didn't have the balls to go over and ask their neighbor to turn off the, turn down the music. So who do they call? They call law enforcement out. Now all of a sudden we get out there, we're a piece of authority, right? We have to do what this person wants, and we get in there, and now we're in a huge fight with 100 people coming out at 2 deputies that, you know. And so, I mean, that's kind of the thing, is that nobody ever says that we do everything 100%. I think everybody knows that. Nobody ever says that there's 100% good cops.
Yeah.
And nobody ever says that. I'll tell you one thing, in my experience, and Kyle's experience, probably going to be the same, is that when there is a bad cop, and we know it, the first thing most good cops do is try to get rid of that person, right?
I wouldn't. I wasn't
like I
blaming
said,
law
no,
enforcement in that
no,
scenario.
And that's
I'm
something
not
I'll
here
say
to
is
defend.
we get something like the situation you described, and we all look at that and we think the same thing.
Absolutely.
You know, we are humans, though. We're subject to error. That was a colossal error. I mean, all the way around. There's so many things that went wrong in that situation.
That's what I'm saying. The anger might be directed in the wrong direction, but I think that people are calling for change, and they might want to see it, maybe not just with the officers themselves, but I mean a policy change, a legislative change. I think that kind of what's happening is that the culture has shifted. You mean from the war on drugs with.
So here's the thing. Before you even go down this
Please,
road,
yeah.
it's like we're a reflection of the public,
Absolutely.
right? And it's the public that decides they want us out here serving warrants and everything else.
Absolutely,
right?
and I think they're making that decision right now.
And when we're enforcing laws like loose cigarettes and stuff, it's like it's not us deciding to do that, and we are going to do what the public wants us to do, and we get subject to all of it, and including people that don't know what they're talking about, making policies that we have to adhere to.
That's exactly what I'm talking about right
putting us
now.
in these precarious positions to where now we're in danger because we're subject to this policy, put into this position by people that made these decisions, and we're human, you know.
And we
That's
still
exactly what I'm hitting on.
want to
Exactly.
do the job of protecting the
Yeah,
community.
and
protecting
like
the
I said,
public.
there may be a day that comes that people decide they don't want us making custodial arrests. You know, if that day comes, then guess what? We're not doing it. You know.
Yeah, I think you
We'll
just
just be glorified social workers that go out there and talk to people and, hey, you committed a crime, stop that. You know. If that's
I
what
think
people
you just
decide.
kind of
But
hit the nail on the head though.
if-
militia man.
You know, because the thing is, I don't ever see that day happening, right? If you are a victim of a crime, you expect justice.
Absolutely.
If you expect justice, there's going to be arrests. And if there's arrests, there is always going to be subject to things going wrong because you're dealing with humans.
So I think kind of what you just said, I think that the sweet ground kind of lies in the middle, right? I think that people are kind of fed up with some of the rules and regulations and laws that are on the books, and they're asking for change right now. And I think that the best case scenario for me is that we kind of fall in the middle. We don't have as stringent as we've had in the past, and maybe we don't have, and we can debate the validity of them. We don't have no-knock warrants anymore happening at 1 a.m, but we still have people getting arrested for domestic violence.
Yeah, I mean, you need to understand the purpose of a no-knock warrant.
I know
I
why
mean,
they
you don't
do it.
hear about the ones that go well.
Absolutely.
You know.
I mean, that's the
and
best
sometimes
time to
they're
do it.
very necessary.
I understand that.
If you're dealing with somebody that we know is going to shoot it out with the police, sometimes a no-knock warrant is merited. And now, you know, are they dangerous? Are they subject to colossal failure like this one was? For sure. And we all see that and we go, oh man, that is a colossal failure.
Well, we even have an instance in this state where in Pierce County, where quite a few years ago, they didn't do a no-knock warrant on somebody they knew was armed. They hit the door, they walk through the door, and the guy opens up on them with an AK and kills a deputy.
The thing is, if the public decides, hey, no more no-knock warrants, guess what? That's the way it is. You know, right now there's the movement on taking away all neck restraints. You know,
Well, I did want to thank you for bringing that up. I wanted to get into that. So, can I drop your belt rank?
no, it's just. I mean, yeah, I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Like,
That matters.
sure.
Okay. Gary's, we've been doing martial arts for a long time. I've been doing martial arts for a long time. So, would you mind elaborating your thoughts on that?
You know, again, I'm a servant to the public. Public saying it's no good. Great. You know, at my department, it's been on the books as a deadly force situation only for a long time, and so I've always been able to do this job around it. The one thing I will say is that the science does not support that. There's been many studies done into it. You can find them. There's nothing out there that suggests it's a dangerous technique. I understand the public's concern. You know, if you have this mind of, hey, law enforcement's going to be out there, they're going to be abusing this. You know, that's there's plenty of departments in this country that have been using neck restraints responsibly and have the data to back it up. You're basically taking a very effective tool that keeps things at low level and ends violent conflict quickly. We're taking that away. I mean, that's my personal take. That's my experience. That's what the data supports. These studies that have been done into it support it being a safe, effective technique. when trained properly. Now, there's been lots of misuse of it, but I would argue that's not people that are trained.
Right.
And that's the important piece to this. And but again, it's not for me to decide.
Right.
So
the thing with like the neck restraints, again, is if the public says that's not what they want, then that's not what they want. But they got to understand then the next area, if we take that one tool away, the next thing is deadly force,
Batons.
and that's it. Batons, guns, or whatever. Just like taking the spray away from riot control. Well, guess what? That means now they're going to be using
Stick
batons.
and shield.
One of the big cases that I know of. I won't tell the city, but you have two guys. One is a good fighter. He's a master defensive tactics instructor. The other guy was a semi-pro hockey player. Both big dudes. And they're fighting a big guy on the side of the road. They're fighting this guy for about 2 minutes. And this guy's just throwing him around. Just punching him, throwing him around. They keep trying to grab hold of him. They keep trying to take him down. They can't do it. The guy is just beating them. A 140-pound female comes in. As the two guys are fighting him, she gets behind the suspect, gets on top of him, wraps him up, and within 20 seconds, this guy is handcuffed and out.
Yep.
Now, that was a 140-pound female. You got two guys, one weighing about 220 pounds. I think Mike about 180, but he was a semi-pro hockey player, very fit dude, right? So the next thing, where did they have to go to next? They had to go way, way up, right? Female gets online, 140 pounds, gets behind the guy, locks that in, puts him down, he's in handcuffs. Before the next thing was the batons were coming out. And then guess what comes out after that? So taking a tool away is not also the answer. Training, like Colin said, training is the answer. When do you use it? How do you use it properly? And know when you're using it, how your partners have to react to it too. Because we all know from doing jiu-jitsu or judo, you get put out, you come back right away, you're back fighting, right? So the thing is training the culture. If people really want change, the change is going to have to come in training. The change is going to have to come in and people being more fit, better trained, making better decisions, being able to talk to people a little bit better in some cases. But that's where that change is going to come.
So I'm by no means an expert in jiu-jitsu, but the way I explain to folks when I have this discussion with them is how many jiu-jitsu tournaments and how many mixed martial arts fights across the nation end in rear naked choke where there's no permanent damage to the person that has it happen to. It's kind of people just don't know the safety of what actually is happening there, and they don't understand the mechanics of it, and it can turn out badly. But again, like you guys said, I think that only goes to lack of training.
I mean, all three of us pretty big dudes.
Yeah.
How many of us have been choked out by somebody weighing half of our weight?
I've been triangled by a 115-pound person before.
I've been put out by a 130-pound female.
So for folks that don't know, it just cuts off the blood, and you go to sleep, and you wake up.
But there has to be an important distinction here, because you're talking about sports competition, and then and even then you have somebody that knows to tap out, or they're making the decision to go unconscious, which happens on occasion, but.
Well, I wasn't tapping out to her, so
I
went out cold. Yeah.
But my point is, a street application of this. But first of all, what I'd like to point out is that there's many times with most departments that at least previously trained and had it on their books as a lower than deadly force technique. They do the documentation to show that it's a control tactic, and many times you're not even putting compression on their neck. You're using it as a means of negotiating the surrender of the person you're dealing with. You got them in that position, and they feel very vulnerable. You get somebody's arm around your neck, and you're inclined to surrender. And then the percentages go down, but there's still the application where yes, you are bringing them in, rendering them unconscious, but that's often not violent. It's a lot of times they just kind of go out, you put the handcuffs on, they wake up and they're in handcuffs. And, I know the departments that had it, it's a very effective tool that they're, not happy to see many of them now. It's getting buried because of the pressure. And again, the public is deciding that, and I'm not anybody to speak against it, but, this is just my experience with, what it is.
So anybody that wants to see, like, I always like it. I like this video. What an expert martial artist can do to somebody who is belligerent. Watch that video of Matt Serra controlling that guy in a bar in Vegas.
There's videos of police officers that are
Yes.
highly skilled that can handle a situation.
And, I really got to give props to Huron and Henner here. Like, they're kind of... I know there's been people that have the criticism of Huron and Henner, but everything I've seen, being a martial artist for, God, the better part of 20 years now, they're kind of leading the way. Like, I think they take... Every year they take what has happened and apply that and change and progress and move forward, and they're evolving this system that I think it seems, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems invaluable to law enforcement. If you were to become an expert in the system they have for law enforcement, it can't do anything but make you a better officer, in my opinion.
I only disagree in one area of this, is that with that, this happened in the 70s and 80s where they tried to force Aikido into law enforcement. So they tried to force a sport style into law enforcement. And I'm a GST guy. I love those guys too. But the reality is simply this, is that you cannot force a jiu-jitsu into this style. We have to, as guys that are trained, we have to develop a system made for law enforcement officers around the law enforcement officer tools that they have. The concepts and principles of grappling, I think, and I'm very biased in this because obviously I'm a wrestler and stuff like that, but the concepts and principles of grappling should be the main process pieces, right? And that includes, your modern wrestling, your catch wrestling, your jiu-jitsus, your judo, stuff like that. But you're going to have to need to defend yourself from strikes. You're going to have to know defense from knives. You're going to have to know striking. If somebody comes at you with a knife, broken bottle, stick, you're going. You know what? Some of the grappling stuff isn't right there right away, and so the system has to be developed around what we do versus trying to force a sports system into what we do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know that they necessarily are applying their sports system. In fact,
they're not.
They're more self-defense oriented,
right.
And if you're talking about like an off-the-shelf product, I don't know many that do it better than them as far as. But again, they are using their platform for many good things for law enforcement. I do believe that. I do believe they believe in what they're doing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And their product, it's a good product. But just like Gary said, that there's still going to be gaps in there because they'll admit it. They're the first ones to admit it. They're not cops. They listen to many cops that know what they're talking about.
I don't know Gary's. I know that you have your Instagram and YouTube and the videos that I've seen of you. You have a very a systematic way of approaching things, which I certainly appreciate. I guess my personal bias would be that I'm more familiar with their side of things.
Yeah, no.
Not that one is better than the other, but
and I totally agree with Kyle 100%. What I see happening is people are trying to push a sports style into this, and thus going, the concepts and principles of GST
Jason?
are awesome. But we can't push a sport into this, right? Taking GST out of it, we can't push just the system of jiu-jitsu in this. And GST does it better than most jiu-jitsu systems, right?
Yeah, and I don't think that what Drake is saying is necessarily. I think it's just that it's more involved than just one little corner, and they're very good at that one little corner. But it's not that he's saying don't do that. It's like do that plus this. You
have to know the gun. You have to know around the gun, right? Not only the defense of the gun, offense of the gun. Impact weapons, right? Being good with impact weapons. We're still using. You guys are still using tasers, right? I mean, you still got to understand what those things can do and can't do, how they're effective and how they're ineffective. Because
you need to know transitioning between tools and
know how to transition from grappling to your taser. A lot of times back to grappling, because taser is not as effective as people think. Again, the public thinks I pull out a taser and I hit,
I've seen dudes like
Kyle with it.
There's a video online,
and there's many reasons that can happen. I mean, I am also trained as a master taser instructor, and I can tell you, it's a great tool. It's very effective, but it was put out there almost like a magic bullet by many departments that's going to solve all the problems. Like, hey, we don't need to train going hands-on anymore because we have these now, and that's just not the case.
We'll
and the problem with that is, you see, and you see these situations where, because that's all they know, things start going bad. They're pulling on a taser in an inappropriate situation. You know, there's proper application of a taser, and because that's all they're trained in. Now they're pulling on a taser when they should be, you know, grabbing the person or you know, using some other option, and they're going to that because that's really the only training that they're getting. Right?
So let me bring this kind of home here. So I think the overall, all three of us are in agreement that primarily, it's not the be all end all, but we need more training.
I think we said it at the beginning, right?
Yeah, I
That's
we
it,
basically
right?
have the entire.
We went a big circle,
Yeah.
but I think it's good because people get to see your guys' perspective of everything. Like, I mean, you got to elaborate. I mean, we need more training. Is a easy slap a sticker on, like, okay, cool, it's gonna fix everything. But you got to elaborate on what that actually entails.
And again, I don't think it's a slap on, you know, the old freaking, you know, infomercial thing there.
But wait,
that's
more.
not going to fix everything. You know, I am not
direction.
versed enough in policies and, you know, the whole criminal justice system. I can only speak to what, man, I talk about this all the time. You know, if you're climbing the ladder to success in law enforcement, I'm like the dirt that the ladder is on, and I don't care to get even started on the first rung. I'm the lowest level here. This is my experience. And this is the situation that I see through my lenses. So it's basically just my truth. Now there could be someone somewhere who's like, you don't understand the whole system, and that's accurate. I don't. You know, I can only speak to my. So even if we got 100% on board with training, right, and we create these cops that can handle themselves in these situations, and we start seeing deadly force go down and everything else, like, you know, that doesn't mean that everything is solved and that there's never going to be any problems with the police anymore.
Yeah.
All right, we got 1 minute left. Gary, want to bring it on home? What do you got? You got anything?
No, I think it's a great conversation. Thanks for having us out.
Of course.
Really appreciate
I
it.
thought we were going to get light and fun.
I was going to, but this shit got heavy.